Hi y'all, welcome to CISO Art. This is my finished acrylic painting of a mermaid and guitar player. I struggled with the composition and thought I'd share with you how I worked through that and came up with this final result. What you're looking at here is where I ended on my previous video about composition and telling a story. I was happy with all of the individual elements of the painting: the sky, the guitar player, the colors, the cliffs, the mermaid herself. But I wanted to show some distance between them, and so I made her a lot smaller to try to push her back into the painting. And as you can see here in the placement and with trying to show that she was under the water, it basically obscured her from the painting. So that wasn't going to work. I thought that the upper portion of the painting was working the way that it was. So I wanted to leave it alone and not mess with it. You know, if you fiddle with it too much, you end up making it worse. So what I did was I took the lower portion of the painting and I just gessoed over it. 3 coats with a light sanding in between. It gave me a fresh start, a blank canvas, if you will, and that way I wasn't struggling against what was already there. And I had finally resolved in my mind that the way to show the distance between them and yet still make her visible to the painting was just to show the above the waterline and the below the waterline. And it's almost exactly in the middle of the painting, which kind of goes against, you know, your rules of thirds and those sorts of artistic rules for composition. But for this story, I thought it was important and it was okay and acceptable to put the dividing line between the two of them in a way to show the distance in the middle of the painting. The problem that you run into with that, however, is you don't want to have an effect of having 2 entirely different paintings pasted onto a board next to each other. So you need to do some things to tie them together and yet show the distance and the difference. Now, because the color scheme of her being underwater is so different from there, obviously that's your big distance. And in our mind, we know that he is a land creature and she is a sea creature. So that's the distance and the difference. The things that bring them, so I think I was successful in showing their, you know, the distance between them, but it's a love story and I want to bring them together, even though they can't be because of the barrier of their different environments. So I tried to do some subtle things to bring them back together, so to speak. And one of the first things was lighting. The gentleman had a very strong highlight from his light source that's somewhere over here, the sun shining brightly on his face. And so I did some very light, very subtle light rays that, you know, came off of him down there into the water. I just used a simple dry brushing technique, and again, it's very subtle. After the dry brushing of those light rays, I did do several very thin glazes with phthalo blue to give more of that underwater feel, and so that covered up and made those light rays very subtle. The other thing I did to tie the 2 elements of the composition together was to continue the highlight on the edge of these rocks above the water down into the underwater portion. I did the same thing here and here. Another thing that I did, which is subtle but I think very important, and I'm not sure anyone else would pick up on this without, you know, being told, but it makes sense to me. She's underneath the water, and so she is going to cast reflections on the underside of the ripples of the movement of the water. Now, these are not big, giant, crashing waves. It's a very calm and serene environment that shows the connection between the two of them. So it's just ripples, not big old waves. So I took some of the colors of this portion of the harp and her dark hair and put those into the reflections of the water. And I accentuated this area that is a reflection of her tail. And you may not be able to see it on this camera, but if you're up close and in person, you can see there's some very subtle colors from her flesh in here. And I did the same thing for him, as what reflects from below, so it does from above. So I took the same colors that are in the guitar, the burnt siennas and yellow ochres, and put them here, and a little bit of flesh color. And I took the dark colors of his pants and the guitar neck and his shoes and put them in here. And in this section right here in the middle, the two colors that are reflected, or the reflections from him and her meet. So that's their common point. Also, when I redrew this, I changed the tilt of the harp so it wasn't so stark. I did it like this. So in a way, you know, I angled it back a little. So in a way, it also makes like a little triangle. And I just think it was a more inviting angle and more open and receptive, you know, to him. And obviously the last thing that ties them together compositionally, and because we know what we're looking at, we have experiences with musical instruments. They're both playing musical instruments. And that's the last thing that ties them together. But yet, because of the barrier and the different environments that they're in, I think that successfully shows the distance. So I'm quite happy how it turned out. And I hope you picked up on maybe something you can do. I think the number one thing I can say, especially for acrylic painters, is that this medium is so forgiving of mistakes. And if you just need to start over, you can very easily. Just slap on a few coats of gesso and sand in between. You have a blank canvas and you can start over. And you don't lose anything when you do that. You learn from every time you put brush to canvas. And so just keep trying. If it doesn't work, start over. I'd be honored if you'd leave me a like, a comment, or a suggestion in the section down below. And if you're so inclined, subscribe. I'll be putting out another video very soon. Thanks so much for watching.